right, we'll call to order the Stevensville Town Council meeting for Thursday, March 11th, 2021. The time is 7 p.m. Ms. Bertha, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Devlin? Here. Councilmember Ludington?
Here.
Councilmember Sherd?
Here.
Councilmember Vick?
Here.
And Mayor Dewey.
Here. If you'd please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we will open the floor for public comments on items not listed on tonight's agenda. If you would wish to comment on an item on tonight's agenda, you have the opportunity to do so before the decision on that item. But if you have a comment on items not listed on tonight's agenda, we invite you forward at this time. Please state your name and address for the record if you wish to do any comment. Okay. Council has before them, in terms of approval of minutes, February 11th, 2021 council meeting minutes and February 25th council meeting minutes.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes as presented.
Second. Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Vick, seconded by Ms. Devlin to approve the council meeting minutes as presented. Council discussion? Public comment? All right, hearing none, we'll call for the vote. Ms. Bertha?
Councilmember Devlin? Aye. Councilmember Ludington?
Aye.
Councilmember Sherd?
Aye.
And Councilmember Vick.
Aye.
All right, approval of biweekly claims, U.S. claims 16582 through 16617.
I'll make a motion to approve the claims.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Vick, seconded by Mr. Short to approve the biweekly claims. Any council questions or discussion?
I just have two questions. I saw that 16617 is Twin Creeks 42673 for lighting.
So that's our monthly power bill
For lighting.
for the streetlights.
Okay. I'm comparing it to Creekside. It seems to be almost double. Is there,
They have more lights.
that makes sense?
And it's reduced, as a matter of fact, on that note, it's reduced with the LED conversion. So we're saving some money there. As soon as those LED lights went in, they immediately dropped our power bill that day.
Great.
Any other questions from council on the claims? Public comment? All right, hearing none, we'll call for the vote. Ms. Bertha?
Councilmember Devlin? Aye. Councilmember Ludington?
Aye.
Councilmember Sherd?
Aye.
And Councilmember Vick.
Aye.
All right, we'll move into administrative reports. The airport report is in your packet. This is a new format that the airport manager will be providing you from this point forward, and hopefully on occasion he's able to come and present any remarks he has for you. It's been a bit of a transition over time with the part-time manager, but he's able to commit some more time at this time of year to the position, and we're excited to have him on board. So you'll be seeing more from the airport as that progresses. The community development report, building department statistics are in your packet as well from the building code enforcement. One note to change on building codes is that there's a new hotline set up by our contractor to schedule building inspections. So as builders and contractors, rather than calling the office directly to schedule those inspections, there's a hotline. We're going to integrate our phone system so that they can dial that hotline directly from the phone menu if they do in fact call the office. So there's just a small change there that folks should be aware of. From the planning and zoning side of things and community development, we're looking at a planning and zoning meeting at the end of the month on a couple of zoning applications rezoning applications that have come forward. And we'll seek recommendation from them before those applications come to the town council. The finance report is not available this evening. Mr. Underwood fell ill and is not able to join us. I would imagine he'll send out some statistical data for you guys if you missed this meeting this evening. The fire department report is in your packet as well. Fire chief is out of town and the assistant chief is tied up with fire department duties. So there's no one to present this evening, but those statistics are in your packet. Police department. Mr. Ellington. Excuse me, we skipped fire department, or it's the Parks and Recreation Department. He's also out, still on paternity leave. He's due back the week after next. Now we'll do police department. Thanks, John.
Okay, for the month of February, this is working. Okay. We stepped up efforts in traffic enforcement, get a lot of complaints. It almost doubled from January to 39 warnings.
Can't hear you.
Volume's not up.
You'll have to speak into the mic, John.
All right, can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
Sorry about that. So the month of February, officers stepped up traffic enforcement due to multiple complaints. It almost doubled in traffic warnings, 39 compared to 22. We got the new 2021 Ford Explorer that's now in complete service. So you should be able to see two of them driving around. Also, we completed a pretty good training regimen on the month of February. We're focused on high stress situations as well as discretionary shooting and high liability scenarios. We're moving forward, and we got both officers working night shift as well as myself working the day shift.
Any questions from council? Public Works report, Mr. Cruz.
It's already on.
Good evening. You should have this in your packet. I'll go over it quickly. Month of February, we produced 1.539 million gallons of water, down a bit from last month. We completed all regulatory reports, all meter readings. There were 48 unread meters. Last month, we replaced 5 meters, jetted 1 sewer line, troubleshot 3 sewer problems, wastewater, 5.369 million gallons, down from last month. Again, regulatory reports filed. Excuse me. We had a couple large trees come down due to snow. We prioritized the non-reading water meter project due to the fact that most of them are inside dwellings and businesses. COVID made it difficult for us to get to them, so we set up appointments, and the goal was to get done by next week. Several of the crew troubleshot a couple different issues at the plant, resulting in savings, approximately $3,500, and on a DEQ testing protocol, $200 a month savings going forward. Met with our consulting engineers, excuse me, regarding getting our water system on our SCADA software, which will allow us to remotely troubleshoot and hopefully reduce callouts. One of the staff passes CDL. We implemented a maintenance documentation protocol, documenting all the work that we do specifically or particularly on roads. We tighten up the fleet management of all the existing vehicles. Place a security lock at our domestic water supply reservoir. We spent quite a bit of time removing snow. We spread 30 tons of sand, and the new plow blade allowed us to really react quickly and get into tight spots. We took a look at all the storm. Sorry, I'm not used to talking with a mask. We inspected all the storm drain dry wells on Smith Street and realized that almost all of them are filled with silt. It's a priority project as soon as things thaw out. We did a bunch of training, town personnel, safety data sheets, personal protective equipment, confined space. We're updating all the existing SDS books. Glenn is currently on medical leave, and the new well-spoken and public works director was hired.
Are there any questions from the town council?
Yeah, the night that you had gotten hired, I had brought up an issue that some people were having with water,
Yes.
the quality of their water.
Yes.
How can they try, like, find a way to get a hold of you so that you can try to troubleshoot their issue? Because it seems like the issue is located on Buck Street over here and around that area.
That's what I understand. I've spoken with one individual, and we requested the tests require a special container, which is arriving tomorrow. And if it gets here on time, we're going to that residence and taking water samples and sending them with our samples. I heard that one last month.
Any further questions from the town council on public works? Great, thanks, Mr. Cruz, appreciate you. All right, in rapid fire, that concludes the administrative reports section of the agenda tonight. We have no guest correspondence, public hearings, or unfinished business to consider, and we will move directly into new business. First item before you this evening is discussion decision and consent to mayor's appointment of Elizabeth Hyde as volunteer firefighter.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to suspend council rules to move the item for the Burnt Fork Estates up to begin.
You want to move, okay, just so we're clear, your motion is to suspend council rules and move agenda item D to the front of the list.
Correct.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Vick, second by Ms. Devlin to suspend council rules, moving agenda item new business D to the front of the list for consideration. Any council discussion? Any public comment? All right, hearing none, we'll call for the vote. Council, or excuse me, Ms. Burkett.
Councilmember Devlin. Aye. Councilmember Ludington. Councilmember Sherman. Aye. And Councilmember Beck.
All right, motion passes. We will now undertake consideration of new business item D, discussion decision approval with conditions or denial of preliminary plat for major subdivision known as Burnt Fork Estates. It is, I based on our virtual meeting on Monday, I don't think it's council's intent tonight to make any sort of decision regarding Burnt Fork Estates. As I kind of see this playing out, I think tonight you'll probably take an opportunity to get into the meat of the subdivision, ask questions of the developers, maybe explain some expectations that you have of the subdivision, and maybe further explain any expectations of the process that you have that the administration may need to undertake. Just for reference, as you consider the time that you have to consider the subdivision altogether, you have 3 more opportunities at the very least in just the next coming couple of months. So you have your March 25th town council meeting. You have a special council meeting that's scheduled for April 1st that just has one basic agenda item. You need to open some bids for the Third Street project that day. And then you have your April 8th council meeting as well. And then of course you have your second council meeting in April where you could undertake the consideration. So you do have plenty of opportunities over the next council meetings. If there are any meetings in addition to those council meetings that you find necessary, we just need to know that so that we can get those scheduled on the calendar and coordinate facility use here in this room. So just keep those in mind if you would. And from there, it sounds like the representatives from the developers from PCI do have a presentation that they're willing to share with the council if you want to entertain that, unless you want to open with any remarks first off. Ms. Devlin?
I guess I'll start off with remark kind of lead into my vision of how this process should go. There's a lot of questions that are out there. When there's an answer to a question, it leads into many other questions. We are not in a position to facilitate a question and answer, so to speak. I would like to see the developer, maybe not just you two, but that the developers come have an open meeting to the community where there's an ample opportunity with presentations, with paperwork they can take home, where they can actually ask those questions to the developers, get some hardcore answers, make it more of a personal setting than where, you know, we have public hearings, they have all these questions, we have all these questions, we try and ask you the questions, we try and get the answers and then talk to the community and they have more, I mean, it just doesn't work. This is too big of a project. In my opinion, at this time, it's not a viable proposal that you proposed to us. So I'd really like to see, I would like to see the developer do their due diligence. At the end of the day, we have to be able to look at our community members and say, this is going to be okay. This project is going to be okay. And I do not feel that I can do that at this time. So leading into trying to make a decision in the real near future is not something I'm willing to do.
And I have something similar to say as well. I think we heard a week ago tonight, pretty much 30-1 that the people here and our businesses here don't wish to have a C2 section out there. I do understand the reasoning behind wanting to put one out there. I think in some places it would be, in some other location, in some other place other than Stevensville would be a great place. But the concern is that the people that currently live in Creekside, when they bought their homes, they were told that a development that would be going in there would be very similar to what they're in right now. And then it turns around and they're getting something completely different. But I would really like to, and as far as water rights go, I know that's being resolved and everything. And even though we are currently in a closed basin, I do want to straighten something out there. Even though we're currently in a closed basin, the NRC can't approve a permit to appropriate water for a municipal water supply. So although what rights and everything like that are still being contested in water court, we can still get a permit for water that we do have a right for new wells and whatnot. However, my concerns are our current water capacity, current sewer capacity, who's going to pay for these upgrades, because the math adds up to around $30,000 for a project that we're going to end up looking at paying multi-million dollars for to upgrade these things. And our current residents, I don't expect them to have to pay that.
MC, can I ask where you're getting the $30,000 figure?
The $200 per lot.
Okay, and you were speaking in terms of traffic improvements, right? Not sewer.
Okay.
Okay, am I understanding you correctly?
That's the other part that I was talking about, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Sher.
I would just like to echo some of what Jamie said. I do feel that we need more meetings to inform the public, whether those are public hearings or meetings organized by you, and having the public an opportunity to ask questions and have those questions answered.
One thing I did fail to mention in my opening was if the council would entertain the opportunity, I'd like to have the opportunity for the Public Works Department to resubmit a supplemental staff report, given that there's been a change in guard of the Public Works Department, and just provide whatever review that Mr. Cruz wants to provide on the subdivision, give him that opportunity to do so, since he'll be leading the department into whatever impacts this subdivision does bring the community. So the council would entertain that. It won't take us very long to pull something together because we have a lot of the data already in front of us. But it's apparent that the town needs to do a better job in educating its citizens and the people who own the water system and sewer system into what their water and sewer system is actually capable of doing. We failed at doing that. And we think we can address some of that in the staff report, but also address some other concerns that were maybe overlooked in the original review of the subdivision that may shed some light for the council in terms of how they want to proceed.
I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I think we're needing some other reports, maybe not necessarily from the town, but some traffic reports, some other clarification, or maybe those to be redone a little bit. So I wouldn't oppose that. But I don't think we just stop with having that report rewritten.
Sure, and I'm just speaking in terms of what the administration can do in terms of involvement in providing information on the project. We're not the experts on the project, of course, the developers and the representatives are. But when we look to address infrastructure concerns and how the development impacts the infrastructure, I think that our new public works director should have an opportunity to share his thoughts with the town council in a formal way, like a staff.
And also too, before I can really do a serious consideration on this issue, I would like to see something definite from DNRC and DEQ about water rights rather than something from the attorneys going back and forth. I want to see something from the state of Montana that says you guys have the water rights, you guys have permittable use for that area to provide water to.
The only way that will ever happen, MC, is in the form of a permit. That's what the permit does. I mean, we can provide water rights abstracts as long as the day is. We have plenty of those in terms of proving the rights that we own. But getting the NRC to commit to permitting our rights that we have through the well field, that's exactly what the permitting process is that we're doing currently. And I'll address a little bit of an executive report in terms of where we are in that process, but that permit's really that hard concrete evidence that we have the right to pump water out of the ground that we have, own.
I would welcome information, additional information from the Public Works Department. My concern is that in regards to traffic, we are focused on Logan and Burnt Fork, but I haven't seen discussion in regards to how much traffic is going to be on Main Street. We have 50% increase in traffic coming down Burnt Fork, and how's the traffic going to look on Main Street? Another one of my concerns that I don't see discussed is in regards to stormwater, when that gets to Swamp Creek, where does that go from that? How does that impact the northeast side of town?
I don't disagree with what the council is asking for, and I think that that's perfectly reasonable. I guess I come at this at a different angle as someone who was on council when Creekside was originally approved, and a lot of the infrastructure questions that were on the table at that point, and what council and the town went through as that development occurred, and the issues that they had, and what we had to try to do to solve some of those issues. And if we hadn't proceeded, we wouldn't really have known that those issues occurred. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're not really trying to put the cart before the horse here. We're just trying to get the process started. There are a lot of hoops that everybody, including the town and the council, have to jump through before they're able to turn a shovel or sell a lot. They've been through basically a year-long process already. COVID, of course, didn't help any of that, but there are a lot of issues that will have to be resolved as we go along. Part of my opinion is that we can decide who's going to pay for that as those issues are resolved. If we want to wait for approval of this subdivision and get answers to all that stuff, the town will be paying for it. If we want to approve the subdivision with condition that they have these approvals, the developer will be paying for it. So we kind of have to weigh those factors along the way. There's a lot of things that have to happen before they're able to proceed. They certainly are not going to be able to build a house if they can't obtain a permit for stormwater. We're certainly not going to be able to put in houses and build things before they're able to determine whether or not the wastewater will be sufficient. And I am well on board with the water rights the town has struggled with for decades. I think I told the council before, I was, in the short time that I was mayor, I was at a meeting with Andy with the DNRC when PCR was representing the town in that particular instance. And sat there with the representative of the DNRC. He said, yeah, we just need more from you guys. We said, well, what do you want? He said, he looked me straight in the eye and said, I can't tell you. So what do you do then? What do you do when a guy who says, you need to give me more information, but he won't tell you what information that is? So that's the kind of thing that we've been dealing with as we go along. Yeah, I would certainly like to see that cleared up. And I would certainly like to see the developer help us with that. Or we can do it on our own. I see that as being able to share some of this economically with the developer, or the town can bear that burden. It's well on the package.
Does the council want to entertain the presentation that PCR has prepared? It's different than the presentation at the public hearing. In fact, a different presenter, even Andy is here to present, which is a distinct privilege. We should have charged admission at the door. So if you're willing to entertain that, we could go ahead and fire up the projector. And Paul and Jamie, you might want to stretch your necks a little bit before we get started. No, it's all right. You'll be on lot C4. Okay, let's go ahead. If you want to fire that up.
Oh, right. Yeah, I don't want to go through another one. That's neat.
This is a small podium. Well, thank you for the opportunity to present tonight. I didn't expect to get bumped up in the agenda. So I hope we're not holding up other items. I guess I want to lead in before I start into this presentation, and I'm hoping members of the audience can see this well. I can certainly understand and respect sitting on a council or a planning board or things of that nature, you know, hearing concern from citizens. I sat on 2 boards in the city of Missoula, or county of Missoula, Board of Adjustment and Planning Board myself. And so I can certainly understand and have compassion to those concerns when you get a room full of people showing up and saying we're concerned, and that is a concern, and you should take those things carefully and understand them. I think there's a lot of things, maybe a misconception of what this process is, and I didn't put the slide in this presentation. I think John had the week before, but it kind of outlined a process, and we are certainly early in that stage. What you're issuing is called the preliminary plat approval. There's many other stages to perfect that and get those tracks of record, something that could be built on, something you can move with. So there is a long road. If this were to garner approval with conditions, there's a long road ahead still. There's a lot of agencies, there's a lot of regulatory oversight. There's a lot of engineers involved, both with your contracted engineer, with myself, with the town's staff. and the DEQ, and the DNRC. So there's a number of people that are looking out for the best interest of citizens in this infrastructure. Another thing I think that we had heard is this public process. We have been in this process, and there's a timeline slide we'll get to, for a long, long time. There has been a lot behind the scenes, maybe, that everyone is not privy to or known, between meetings with town staff, the police, the fire, public works. And I think it is important that probably you do give the new public works director an opportunity to opine, because he is not. He's just came into this, so I think it's very important to have conversations with him, because a number of the conversations we've had were with George previously. So I think that is an important element that would be good to get, some confidence from your own staff. And there was a lot of public participation and opportunities throughout this way. I don't even know what meeting we're on. We're on the 4th, 5th. This might even be the 6th public meeting that's been held. I think everyone's very aware of the project and a lot of the big picture elements, but I think a lot of times what's not grasped is potentially some of the finer details of the process and other things that are involved and some of the background that's going on. So hopefully maybe this will clear up some of those things, and we've tried to capture what most of those were. I can bump the slideshow.
I sure can.
Okay. So the project, I think I've got a pointer here. Yep. So the project's located, this would be Logan Lane. This is the sharp corner on East Side Highway. Middleburg Fork lies here, and the project lies at that intersection. I think we're all pretty vehemently familiar with where the project is. It consists of, in its proposal, 78 residential lots in R1, 43 multifamily lots in R2 zoning, and we have proposal for 16 C2 lots that were rezoned on the southern approximately 8 acres on 57.668 acres. Next slide, please. This is also a copy of the preliminary plat that's being vetted, has been vetted throughout the process. The staff report was generated on. There were some recommended conditions by the planning board at the end to request a connection between the commercial area, this 8 acres, and the residential area. And so we will have a slide later along in this presentation that shows a alternative connection that we heard the planning board kind of condition. And there was a lot of discussion about that. Should there be a connection? Shouldn't there be a connection? It's like everything, there are pros and cons, but we did provide an alternative option to look at a road coming in through here and removing this cul-de-sac and this potential connection that's shown on here. But nonetheless, this is the plat that has been vetted through the staff report public hearing process to this point. I think the next slide. This is the phasing plan. Unfortunately, we did bring a couple. There's 3 kind of main documents, and they are posted here throughout the room. Hopefully you can see those. This is a phasing plan. It's proposed in 7 phases to be platted out, I think, up until the year 2030 or 31, as I recall. Some of those numbers are hard to read, but I believe it was 2030.
Yeah, it's 2030. December 31st, 2030.
Okay, so that's the phasing plan that's proposed. This would be that commercial area that's currently zoned R2 and then that C2 area. Okay, next slide. This is also a copy or an illustration of the park plan. We proposed 3 primary park areas. One is a park area that would be bordering Creekside Meadows Phase 1. That was put there because we did hear in early meetings, we'll talk about in a few minutes, meetings with Creekside wanting some kind of border or buffer. We sort of heard all kinds of things of how much that could be. At the end, it sounded like it was 57 acres, which was not really viable for us. This area is a natural area, would have some trails in it, maybe fall equipment, would be used for some overflow drainage for stormwater, for filtration, bioswale, treating stormwater. It would not be an area that I heard is a mosquito pit. The soils out here are very free draining in general. It would also have a drain at the low spot, so that it would always drain and release at pre-development rates. So it's not a big, deep, year-round swimming pool that would be collecting mosquitoes and things that we've heard. That's one thing that was discussed. There's another kind of higher intensity grass area pavilions for this, around this multifamily and this reach here between the multifamily. That would be more your traditional Kentucky bluegrass kind of treated turf grass area. And that's located kind of breaking up the multifamily. And then one other area is more of a natural area as well, trail, dog park area, providing a buffer between the commercial, proposed commercial, and the R2. Next slide. Well, one other thing on that one, I just want to point out, there was a requirement for 3.79 acres of parkland dedication. The current proposal, as this is proposed, has 4.6. And as it's kind of highlighted, it was used for the development of natural areas, trails, provides buffers, dog parks, turf grass, and drainage facilities. Next. This property, it was, since I've known it in the Creekside era, and I became familiar with this in 2000, was my time in the valley, and started working and doing this kind of work since 2000. It was owned by Ellison Cattle Company. I think prior to that, it was a Lightfoot or something possibly, or maybe not, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But Ellison had owned it for a number of years. Property was annexed and zoned R1 and R2 into the town in 2002. In 2003, Town Council approved Creekside Meadows in a 5-phase residential subdivision that included R1 and R2 zoning that had the multifamily. We'll see a slide of that Creekside Meadows in a few moments. Due to a various number of circumstances, phases 3 to 5 was never platted. One of the first things that was sort of investigated in this project, and maybe not completely understood, is, was there an entitlement? Could Creekside continue? If Creekside could have continued, we would have done that. The developer would have taken not a year and would have been platting lots long ago and building houses. We learned that that entitlement had lapsed, and so we had no alternative to move forward other than present this subdivision. So I've heard things about, we just wanted a Creekside. If it wasn't for an expiration and a plat expiring, you would have got an exact Creekside phases 3 through 5 with maybe minor revisions, but that plat would have been used, but it was expired. So it makes it sort of a moot point or irrelevant. What did not expire, though, is shown on there, is the annexation and the zoning was placed. That's been in place and still is today. Thank you. Unfortunately, it's hard to see, so I'll kind of use my pointer here. This is the Creekside plat in its entirety. This is phase 2. This would be this is known as currently phase 2. I think the phasing plan was modified throughout the years, but this is what's known as phase 2 today. Phase 1 lies on this northern reach, and this would have been the balance of phases 3 through 5. Unfortunately, you're not seeing very well, but if you could see, there was about a 2.5 acre multifamily zone proposed down here with, I believe it was 12 units on that one, and there was 16 units proposed on this, about 3.8 acres, some approximate area over this reach or the intersection. So there was 2 large multifamily lots in that one that was presented as R2 and using as multifamily, but whenever the ultimate zoning resolution done, that line was drawn much farther to follow a quarter section line, somewhere clear out in the middle of the subdivision. One sort of left to speculate what could have been done. This was a presentation at the time, sort of like we portrayed some potential opportunities in the development proposal about what opportunities could be done. But ultimately, anything that would have been done in here would have to comply with any zoning in place at that time. So this plan could have been modified, lots could be aggregated. There could have been more density put on this, these 2 tracks. If you just do the sheer calculations in Creekside Meadows, you could have probably put 100 units on those 2 lots alone. So just because this is shown this way doesn't mean that Creekside Meadows could not have had much higher R2 density and much more multifamily, and it had that opportunity to do that. Next. One of the other things I've heard some is, I think, sort of an attempt to indicate that we didn't know this was here. We didn't know this was coming. I don't know how that could reasonably be extracted whenever there are streets built with clear extensions. There are sewer stubs into this property. There are streets heading to a cow pasture. Furthermore, the record plat has not only that, but it's got future development written right on the face of the plat that's recorded. And you can see the underlying lot layout that was proposed. So this concern about maybe this was new to me or I didn't know it was coming is a little hard to understand. Next. I drew a little comparison here, and this is a comparison of Creekside and the Burnt Fork Estates project. Again, this is using the Creekside sort of as it was proposed or presented in that time. This is Burnt Fork Estates as it has been presented as a hypothetical. You can see the land areas are the same. The zoning is the same with the exception of the request to rededicate the rezone the southern 8 acres .C2. They were both proposed for single family and multifamily. And of course we have the C2 proposal addition on the southern 8. Creekside Meadows had 127 lots. There was 28 units proposed on those 2 lots. So there was a total of 129 lots. And if you do this math, they had 155 units or about 2.7 units per acre as a gross computation. Burnt Fork Estates has similar land area zoning with the exception of the commercial that's being proposed. Has 78 single family lots, 43 multifamily lots. We intentionally went through and made a computation to be very conservative about pretty much the maximum you could ever put on those 43 lots. That number is about 131 units. When you take R2 and you make small lots with setbacks, imposed landscaping, parking, we have looked at specific plans and many lots about the maximum you can put on them is duplex to fourplex. There are 2 corner lots down there that had 7 plexes or 10 plexes. That's surely a maximum computation that could be done based on the land area and the 16 units per acre. I highly doubt that anyone with these small lots of the size they are in R2 will ever achieve anywhere near this 131 units. Nonetheless, we were conservative in that approach because there's been this speculation of numbers thrown out there that you hear lots of things and then you hear people use, if you add the units and the lots and then they say, well, it's multifamily, so they can have more. And so it just continues to grow and exaggerate numbers. So that was an approach that we had done intentionally to be conservative. It's unlikely you ever get to 131 units on multifamily. The other thing that's a big leap of faith or of assessment is that every lot's used for multifamily. Most multifamily districts do not build out everything multifamily. The George Smith edition, others have a combination of single family, duplex, triplex, fourplex. It's a combination. And again, this maximum approach did not approach it that way. That assumes there was not one single family home built in the multifamily. So I think it's clear I want to clarify that this is sort of an absolute maximum case scenario. Nonetheless, if that were to come to fruition, this proposal, as we calculated, had 225 units, 3.9 units per acre. This is a little bit more just kind of a comparison of features, if you will. Creekside Meadows relied on the existing road connection. Had Creekside Meadows phases 3 to 5 been platted, almost all the traffic would have been forced out of the existing through Creekside phase 1. We have minimized that because we heard that we've actually wanted no cars going out that way, which is completely unrealistic. So we redesigned the subdivision to get a new approach onto Logan that would try to relieve traffic through Creekside Meadows phase 1. Creekside phase 3 to 5 would not have provided that. The proposed road connection to Middle Burnt Fork Road was in a much inferior location, much closer to the proposed intersection of Burnt Fork and Logan Lane. This new connection that is in your packet, and even more so the alternative connection, if you connect the commercial to the residential, greatly increases that intersection separation to virtually the minimum 600 foot requested by the county. Creekside Meadows relied on water and sewer to phase one. Had Creekside went forward, it would have used the same water rights, the same water pipes, the same treatment system, the same well fields. It would have been the same. It was not going in on wells and septics. It was going to rely and tax your same infrastructure, the same as Burnt Fork Estates does. Stormwater was collected in stormwater piping system on Creekside Meadows. Actually, Creekside Meadows was done in sort of a time frame where stormwater was not looked at nearly as critically. We have a lot more stormwater treatment proposed in Burnt Fork Estates than Creekside Meadows would have ever had. Creekside Meadows had at best a little bit of pre-treatment. And as you just heard the Public Works Director, it's very common those things just get silted up and don't work. We've got that lever in place, plus we've got the bioswales and detention facility. So we're treating stormwater and it's regulated much higher today by the DEQ than it was in this era of Creekside Meadows. This is a little bit of kind of the developer's timeline about kind of the purchase of the property. It was listed for sale in June 19th of 2019. The Hooley signed the buy-sell in September 27th, 2019. And upon that, there was great concern when they signed the buy-sell. They had a number of contingencies I've identified that was very concerning them that they wanted to vet. You know, they did not look to buy a piece of property or move forward with something that was unattainable. So they did work on the Creekside entitlement, water rights, water and sewer capacity with the town, review of zoning, street approaches, market conditions, financing, title, boundary. They did a lot of due diligence to try to verify that this was a viable development property. It was marketed as a development. It was actually marketed as an extension of Creekside, just go file, which is not the case. And like I said, could it have been, that's what exercise that we would have probably followed most likely. They closed in January 4th, 2020. And that was actually after the closing got delayed because they had learned the water rights had been transferred off of this property and they had no surface water rights. They were transferred to the Ellison and other chunks of the Ellison property. And they knew it was important because of their water right research that they wanted to bring something to the town. They wanted to help backfill this water right issue and help the town get water rights. So that was important. There was an agreement that they executed on the 30th of January and the 31st to get that water rights transferred back to the subject property, the 57 acres. Hooley's in this process, they were concerned about Creekside. That was one of the concerns when we met with them initially. They were concerned about Creekside. They've always had intentions and still have intentions to mirror Creekside, particularly along its border as much as viably possible. They've met with Creekside on at least 2 occasions. One was in Town Hall. Town was gracious enough to offer their conference room, looks like in December of 19. We had another meeting with Creekside members, and it's always been a little vague to me if it's Creekside members or board members or some of all of the above, but there were Creekside members is how I'm referring to them. Whether they were board members or residents, it's sometimes been a little hard to tell. But nonetheless, we met with them. We heard their concerns. Shortly after the 17th meeting on December 17th, 2019, within 2 or 3 days later, we got a letter basically saying on Creekside letterhead stating we want basically no development. Like I said, that buffer that we talked about was 57 acres of cows. Then that's just, not the process that they are interested in pursuing. That's just a bridge too far. We had a subsequent meeting because that seemed to kind of fall apart. There was sort of a ruckus created to try to spoil the closing in January of 2020 from water rights again. That was kind of there was some kind of saber rattling from attorneys to the Hooleys about water rights and other things and not moving forward. Nonetheless, they closed. We continued to hear what they had heard, but worked on a layout and the configuration. We reconvened with the Homeowners Association in June of 2020, again, to try to get their concerns. I was in that meeting. I thought we had a productive meeting. I thought we were making progress. We heard their concerns about buffers, municipal water, high groundwater, traffic, and general safety. We heard that they didn't want a project that would devalue their property. Twin Creeks comes across their mind in their life. They don't want the smaller lots, they need more intensity and density. And we provided that so that they did not have that along their buffer and tried to give them some buffer to that. This kind of just a summary again, they really wanted no development, did not want one car using their approach. I think that's good on that slide, pretty much covers it. This one's small. I guess I want to speak to this one particularly because some of the concern I heard about dragging this out more. We want opportunity for everyone to get their answers, no doubt. And if there's answers that haven't gotten today, and staff and public works could opine, that would be great. But there is a regulatory process that's running, and I think the town owes the developer some due diligence in that and following through with what's on the table. We are well past that deadline. We had granted an extension some time ago that is extremely expired. This application was submitted in April of 2020. You can see a timeline, May 25th, it was deemed element review. June 29th or 9th, it was sufficient. We met on July 2nd. This was a big meeting with PCI, HDR, the town's engineer, and the one that did the staff report, and town staff. Every town staff was in that meeting. We had a 4 to 6 hour, probably 5 hour meeting in town hall talking about all these things that are coming up: traffic, police, fire, water, sewer, building construction. Those are all things that were discussed in this meeting. Building permits. HDR was in that meeting to specifically hear concerns and staff to prepare a staff report, which they produced in August after that meeting. We had a planning board meeting scheduled on September 3rd, but we submitted some additional information at that time. I think we clarified some parks detail and a few other things. So we deferred that meeting in September. We had a meeting scheduled. Then after that additional information, HDR updated the report. We had a meeting scheduled at the school, the high school. Can't read that. I think it's October 7th at the high school, but it was canceled due to a COVID case. We, for months, tried to get this back into this meeting. Finally, it wasn't until the end of the year in December, we had our actual planning board meeting where we started at 6 or 7 o'clock at night and went to 1 or 2 in the morning, vetting findings of fact and conditions, and a number of things were discussed in that meeting. There was a subsequent meeting on January 6th because there was concern that they did not want to, they wanted to get more participation. That happened on January 6th. We've had a meeting on March 4th in person down at the church. We're here today. And we certainly understand that there's probably not going to be a decision made tonight, but I think at some point we need to make sure that if there's questions, we get those answered. But I think at some point also we need to get a decision to move. Okay. This slide here, and I don't want to keep you here all night and try to drag it out, but I tried to take this summary, and so this is what we've heard kind of repeatedly. What were the major concerns that have been raised with this project? These concerns have been hammered through your local newspaper, radio ads were brought out against this, public meeting, public hearings. We've heard the recurring same things. It's too dense. It's a mega subdivision. It's a major subdivision. It doesn't comply with growth policy. We've heard things ranging from people saying they don't want growth to we want growth, but just not here. We're not opposed to growth, but we just don't like this growth. High groundwater and drainage concerns. We've heard that the town's can't move forward without resolving the water rights. Can't do anything. You've got to fix that before we move forward. Capacity of water and sewer infrastructure. Traffic and safety concerns on Logan and East Side Highway and Middleburg Fork and Logan Lane has been discussed. Who pays for the project? The citizens, and how much is the developer paying for it? That was one of the closing statements we heard at the last public hearing. And then there's this been question, this commercial element hasn't really drawn a lot of criticism. On the first meeting we had with Creekside and others, this word was not even hardly discussed. This concern about the commercial came up more recently towards the end, more from the Main Street Association, but even in the last meeting, there wasn't, of that 30 comments, there was a few dedicated to the commercial concern, but not as many as it was a lot about these other elements of noted above. The planning board had pretty vigorous discussion about this commercial. Is it right? And we would get no one could 100% decide. They were kind of waffling, but they felt it was right. It saved some trips to town. But the thing that they wanted to see is that connection and some limitation to possibly what those commercial opportunities might look like. Unfortunately, you're not going to be able to see this, which I was hoping you were. So I'll have to flip to my notes. So the first one is project density, this concept of a mega subdivision. First and foremost, in my opinion, that's a very subjective term. It feels good to say. When you oppose a project, it feels really good to have a California developer on the end of it. It gives an extra emphasis, it feels like. The land is currently zoned, and it has been since 2002. We're not creating any new or special zoning districts. We're using zoning districts that are already familiar with and in your zoning code. It's in alignment with the land. We are requesting the rezone of the southern 8 acres. The density is set by zoning at the end of the day. And then sort of as I've described, we propose sort of a maximum worst case scenario, but ultimately the density is set by the zoning. You have to monitor all the constraints I mentioned earlier, like parking, setback, landscape requirements. And frequently as a result, you don't achieve that ultimate maximum density. Bird Fork Estates on the R1 zoning is 2.61 units to the acre. Creekside Meadows Phase 1 is 1.98. Twin Creeks is 3.0. And most areas with the town that we pulled up and looked around at R1 range in the 3 to 4 units per acre. They're denser than the R1 zone. The R2 zoning in Bird Fork, if in the worst case scenario, as I sort of portrayed with the number of units on the number of acres, it's 6.88 units per acre. The current R2 zoning threshold is 16. So we're well below the maximum, even if we were able to maximize, and the likelihood of getting that is pretty unlikely. The George A. Smith subdivision is an example, as I mentioned earlier, and that's one of the reasons density gets brought down is because it's got a combination of uses. Single family, triplexes, duplexes, it's at 4.27 units per acre. The commercial zoning, when you look at 16 units on the 8 acres, comes in at about 1.8 units per acre. One other thing to note on the C2 zoning, if it were to rezone that, and it were to be used for residential, that's also reducing the density of R2 because R2 is 16 to the acre, C2 is 10 to the acre. In summary, the zoning sets the density on the land, and that's already been set years ago. The project would be required to comply with zoning ordinances for uses, setbacks, parking, and landscape requirements. The projected project is likely estimated on the high side for R2 zoning and is expected to be at or below 6 dwelling units per acre. If it were to be achieved, it would still be well below the 16 units per acre. The growth policy. I've heard a bullet or two discussed about the growth policy. I pulled up the growth policy and went through it. I could find 2 pages of information that I thought was interesting that I feel this verifies this project complies with growth policy. The HDR staff report prepared for the town of Stevensville also found compliance with the growth policy. One other thing to note in subdivision review, even if you don't comply with the growth policy, that alone is not a reason to deny a subdivision. Strict compliance with the growth policy is not a reason you can deny a subdivision anyway. We don't think that's the case here, but just finding a clause in the growth policy that says we don't believe it complies in of itself is not a reason to deny a subdivision. There's been this claim that the opponents have read in the growth policy that the project basically uses up the water and sewer and doesn't have capacity. In a nutshell, there is a section in there that indicates that if Creekside and Twin Creeks were built out, they would be a few units over the sewer capacity, but the growth policy falls well short of ever saying it's not intended and could not serve those projects. Other elements that are updated or out of date in the growth policy, particularly in the wastewater, one of the limitations specifically noted is offsite infrastructure, such as the transmission mains to the treatment plants, which was upgraded a few years ago to provide much more capacity to the plant. So This growth policy is a living document that should be updated every 5 years. You're on that borderline anyway. So there's some information, I think, in that growth policy being extrapolated that's probably not representative of today's conditions. The other couple things that I found interested in the growth policy, they identified 9 key things that they wanted to see in Stevensville. We actually meet the first 3 that they identify by trying to, one is diversify the tax base. There's far too much, according to the growth policy, residential reliance on residential and not a diversity of commercial and industrial. This project would provide a diversity of multifamily and some commercial as well. The other one was water. The clause in there that the bullet 2 was water. The discussion about the water was focused on the storage tank. The storage tank has been on the need list, want list for the town. It's on there. It's been on there for probably 2 decades. It's still on there. If this project never came forward, that's still an issue. That's a community-wide issue. That's not an issue being generated by Burnt Fork Estates about the need for the water tank. The creeks, or this subdivision, if it were approved, actually increases that base. It stretches your legs. You get more people to participate to reduce cost. You increase that value and get more bang for your buck. You also, there's a big chunk of development fees. I'll get into in a minute, infrastructure access fees and a number of other fees in the tunes of hundreds of thousands of dollars that are focused on exactly that. It's called an infrastructure access fee. I don't know what it currently is. Brandon of the town probably knows, but I wouldn't be surprised it's not near 5,000 a watt for water and sewer. That's in the tune of $600,000 for this project at least, that can be used to fund these offsite needs that the community needs, not Burnt Fork Estates, but the community needs these things. The other point in there was housing. There was shown in the housing that there has been a big uptick in the housing in the community to be pushed towards, actually, and I've got specific quotes in here, but one of the page 5 of the growth policy states Stevensville will need to add anywhere between 89 and 933 housing units by 2036. Using populations projections as a guide, if the economy in Missoula and Ravalli County continue to strengthen as projected, Stevensville will likely see increased housing demand. On that same note, Missoula's house prices have sharply risen in recent years and increasingly become unaffordable for many residents. As Stevensville already serves as a bedroom community to Missoula, it is very likely that Missoula's high home prices will push people to Stevensville. It goes on to say, in terms of where residential development is likely to occur, there are several areas east and south of town that will likely see new home construction as demand for new housing increases. The most notable areas are the Creekside Meadows and Twin Creek subdivisions. Both these subdivisions are platted, which is another just analogy of how there are some inaccuracies of what you read. Creekside is not platted out because 3 of 5 expired, and Twin Creeks have numerous building lots. There are many instances in the growth policy. The second slide, I wish you guys could see these better, was annexation. Under state law, in order for annexation to occur, a municipality must have a plan for extending services that shows anticipated development at least 5 years into the future and how the city or town will extend services and add sections to the town. The public water facilities on the water and the wastewater, again, numerous inferences in there. The water and the wastewater section basically make inference, if you summarize them, that there's capacity to serve Twin Creeks and Creekside Meadows in its entirety. There was discussion about the downtown, and this project, if it was rezoned, would kill the downtown. Current growth policy made a statement about the downtown in the growth policy. Specifically, by all accounts, Main Street, Stevensville is a vibrant and healthy downtown with a diverse array of shops and businesses, many well-kept historic buildings, and relatively few vacant storefronts. On most days of the week, especially in the summertime, there are many indicators of the success of downtown. Open parking spaces are limited, there is ample foot traffic, and Main Street businesses are well-kept and inviting. This statement indicates that additional room for new commercial areas within the community should have limited impacts on the downtown business. I mentioned earlier, the growth policy should be, or is recommended to be updated every 5 years. That's a clause there. Page 24, goal 5 of the growth policy talks about encouraging higher residential densities. Page 47 of the growth policy notes multifamily and mobile homes have been the biggest single uptick in the homes in the valley in this area, not single family homes. There's been the largest spike in mobile homes at 51% and multifamily at 37% versus single family homes at 23% from the 2000 to 2014 timeframe. Okay, we'll go to the next one. These are getting a little fewer points, so they're a little easier to read. We've heard this comment from people again, like saying, we don't want growth. Yes, we want growth, but just not this growth or just not here. As I mentioned earlier, we told the Creekside that they really wanted no development here. It was 57 acres and leave it alone. As I mentioned earlier, it's also hard to understand how that could be very viable considering the infrastructure and the investment that's been put into and stubbed into this 57 acres to the south of Creekside Meadows. I don't want to duplicate a bunch of things I've already said, so I think you could go to the next one. You've heard about high groundwater and stormwater. The whole entire east side of Stevensville is well known for high groundwater. This subdivision does not create the high groundwater. The groundwater exists as it is today. It's present now. The question is how you deal with it moving forward, building and building practices and home construction. Many homes have been built on this area. There's brand new homes in Twin Creeks and Creekside Meadows that are built on the same landform with the same natural constraints. Homes can be built on areas that have high groundwater and tables. They're done all the time all over the country. We've heard from many folks in Creekside Meadows. We heard from an individual Mel Cook last week. We've heard it in the individual homeowner association meetings that they have groundwater. They have it in their basement. They have it in their crawl space. They were pumping it onto this property. So this groundwater is known, it exists. We groundwater monitor the site. We check the direction and slope of the groundwater direction to see which way it flows, which is a northwesterly direction. Northwesterly, it's not flowing straight north or into Creekside Meadows. Ways we deal with that is through conditions. We don't permit basements and crawl spaces. That was a condition in Twin Creeks. A basement or a crawl space in Creekside doesn't make sense. It should have probably never happened. Some people did that. That would be prohibited in Bird Fork Estates. They will be slab on grade construction on elevated pads. Utility trench plugs would be utilized in the underground utilities to mitigate and channeling of groundwater. Stormwater, I already sort of mentioned that, is generated with overland sheet flows that would be treated through lawn areas on individual lots, collected in curb and gutter. It goes to pre-treatment in the street section in the public works facilities. It's then carried to detention facilities in these common areas where it's released at pre-development rates. And then the ultimate discharge point is into infrastructure that was laid in Creekside Meadows, in public right-of-way, and public streets to collect stormwater for phases 3 to 5 of Creekside Meadows. And the intention is to use that, it's purveyed to an outfall in North Swamp Creek. And as I mentioned earlier, there's much more regulation in stormwater and DEQ today than there was in the Creekside era. Next slide. This town has the town water rights one. We're actually getting to the point some people with good vision might be able to see it.
And as a note, just for everybody's information, we'll post this on our website on the Bird Fork Estates page so that those who can't see the screen can look at it later.
Thank you. That's I appreciate it. There's the claim that you vetted with your town attorney and your water rights attorney that you couldn't proceed with this project without resolving the water right issue. I'm not your water right attorney, and I'll let those guys speak for themselves. And I think Ross and others have been pretty clear on that you can move forward. This concept of you just have to tap the brakes, do nothing, sit on your hands and wait, it does not seem to be vetting out for the legal opinions of the experts that work in that. Many municipalities have the exact same thing you face. They have water right issues. Water rights are not perfect. They're a living document that need revisions and things throughout their livelihood. From anything from places of use, points of diversion, yield, volumes, those things are all constantly needing to be updated. And it is an arduous process that is not fun. The town has actively been working on it and still continues to work on it. And other information and the water rights attorneys has indicated one of the biggest delays has been with this adjudication of the basin, which didn't happen, I believe, until late last year, which I think gives you an opportunity to begin moving forward on that water right application more rigorously. This next bullet point is sort of one I heard earlier. You can work on water rights issues and the subdivision and the sanitation application concurrently. That's a very common approach where you work on a subdivision, you can work on sanitation concurrently, or they can be start to finish relationships. So this concept of you just can't do anything, you can't consider a preliminary plat approval, which is one step of many necessary to move forward, is just not based in foundation and fact. It's speculation. The developers, as I've mentioned earlier, specifically have agreed to donate all the surface water rights to the town to help mitigate. And that mitigation is really more for your future annexations. In discussions with the water rights attorney, he is quite confident that you have plenty of surface water rights and things to help mitigate your place of use to serve Creekside and your other places with what you have in the bank right now. If you didn't get a drop of water out of Burnt Fork Estates, nonetheless, Burnt Fork Estates is contributing those water rights that can be used for the next annexation revision or where the next place may need to come. So they're putting in your piggy bank, but they're not necessary. It does not appear to resolve the water right issue you have today. Next. Capacity of the existing water and sewer infrastructure. I'll just be brief here. I mean, it's back to this issue again. Annexation zoning is things that you have to have in place to say if you annex and zone property, you can't annex and zone property. You don't have the ability to serve. It's kind of biting off more than you could chew, if you will. This property has been annexed and zoned for a long time. As I mentioned, the growth policy points to the intention that Creekside and Twin Creeks will be platted out. We've had general concurrence that there is capacity available from the town, but that ultimately has to get vetted. When we go to DEQ and ask for a water main extension or a sewer main extension, one of the things we have to get is a letter from the PE that says there's adequate water to serve that. I have to have that to put my application together and submit. Without that, if I can't move forward, I'm stuck. This plat never gets filed. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of money being contributed through infrastructure access fees that were approved, and they move forward to the greater community through these infrastructure access fees. Not to mention your base, your consumer base is bigger to help pay for these costs that the community may need. And sort of that last one is kind of just a summary that ultimately the existing water and sewer capacity will be reviewed by the town's engineer, currently HDR, to ensure a capacity, to issue a capacity letter. This requirement as the project moves forward through the sanitation approval. Additionally, HDR, the town itself, and the Montana Department of Environmental Quality will also review plans prepared by a professional engineer. These reviews are to confirm capacity and plans are in compliance with towns and DEQ standards. Traffic safety and concerns. There's been a lot of discussion about it. We've heard things that about both the intersections on the north and the south of this project. And they are both interesting intersections. Neither one at some point in their life was very good. Some of them probably still aren't today, particularly the one at Logan and Eastside. That intersection, again, sort of like the groundwater, it's broke today. It isn't what anyone would want. No engineer or anyone would come up with that today. It doesn't comply. If Burnt Fork Estates doesn't go forward, there's the same junky intersection there today that there will be with or without Burnt Fork Estates. The safety concerns at Logan and Middle Burnt Fork may have already potentially be on the pathway to a resolution. There was a higher crash incident in that intersection identified. I heard earlier about things about wanting to see a traffic impact study. We've done there's a 60-page traffic impact study that was submitted as part of this report. I have a copy sitting on the floor. It's been modified 2 to 3 times after subsequent meetings we've heard with planning boards and specific concerns. we've already conducted a safety audit of Logan and Middle Burnt Park with a traffic engineer that we subcontracted with, and he consulted with MDT. And the basic conclusion is, with or without Burnt Fork Estates doesn't make that intersection any worse. There's slight upticks in traffic volume, but the capacity in the network is there. The 2018, and the crash incident was prior to 2018, so MDT looked at it, and what they found is it was right angle 90-degree collisions. And so they installed new signage and warning signs, and subsequently in 2019 and 2020, they've indicated in the traffic study there have been no recorded accidents at that intersection. Traffic is a long-term solution. You have to look at it. I mean, it needs to be monitored for upcoming years. One of the recommended conditions of approval is that we did that. We looked at the traffic study. We've already engaged and embarked on that traffic study to say, what does it need today? And every plat or every phase that would be filed, that same condition still rides over us. So if 5 years from now, that traffic intersection looks different and traffic impacts start to rise, and we see that rise, we couldn't record that plat without revisiting that traffic study and updating it. Right now, the traffic study says, do nothing, wait, see what it's doing. It may be working. Well, the last thing DOT and others want is over engineering, over signing. They don't like those things. They don't like extra lights. They don't like those distractions for neighborhood complaints and other reasons, and distractions to drivers. They want to take a minimalistic approach, but find that sweet spot for safety. So that takes time to get traffic data to figure out where you are in that cycle. But we've looked at that. We've looked at the traffic impact study. The traffic volumes go up. We've got the distributions in the TIS that was included in this report. It's in that packet. So that has already been looked at extensively, the traffic study. We also had him look at the speed study on Logan, and what he found is speeds were consistent with the speed of 45 miles an hour. Now, maybe 45 miles an hour should not be the right speed, but what he found in his speed study was traffic in general meets the requirements to be following the 45-mile-an-hour speed limit. I guess in summary, that it's kind of comes down to that last statement that furthermore, the developer has agreed that any of the proposed conditions that were necessary to mitigate impacts as a result of Burnt Fork Estates, they were willing to accept those. There's proposed conditions in the staff report that talks about waiving pro rata. It also talks about discussion with regards to an SID if that were to come up. So the developer is comfortable with the recommended conditions of approval to mitigate those traffic concerns. We're almost done. This concept of who pays, the citizens, how much. The developer is responsible for paying for all this process, all the on-site infrastructure, water, sewer, road, storm, curb, gutter, sidewalk, any of the other impacts that would be directly related to this subdivision and conditioned as part of approval, such as the traffic impact study, or improvements if necessary at Logan Lane and Middle Burnt Park. Those things would all be borne by the developer. What's not borne entirely by the developer is a community-wide problem. I don't think anyone could think it would be reasonably fair to say Burnt Fork Estates is responsible to build you a new water tank. Burnt Fork Estates, you need a water tank today. Now, if you have Burnt Fork Estates platted, you have a larger base. You've got infrastructure access fees to help pay for that. You've got a bigger population that helps offset those costs and lower those user costs. Make the next one. The final one is a little bit of discussion on the commercial that we've talked about. There was that concern about drawing interest to downtown. There's a lot of speculation on that concept, how much gets drawn away from downtown, and it really is not quantifiable, I don't believe. The town currently has limited C2 opportunities. There's been some routes put down up there with commercial taste to them, like the food bank, pantry partners, the bus barn, for example. The developers have had expressed interest in commercial lots there. So the open market, the public market indicates there is some interest from the public to have a commercial lot in that location. One of the other things the developer has offered with the rezone is to donate one of the lots, I believe it's C12, for a community fire department in the future when the town was ready to build that. Back to the deal of the growth policy of wanting to diversify your base. That C2, as I mentioned, is somewhat of a lighter touch on the land than the R2 zoning that's currently there. It has lower dwelling units per acre than R2 does on it as today. The type of commercial uses in there are already by nature in C2 zoning lighter. There was also a discussion, and the developer's been willing to sort of look at that list of opportunities in C2 and par that back to things that might be inflammatory or might seem to a bridge too far in that area, if you will. So they're open to discussion about what those areas could be restricted through covenants. That road connection that was suggested by the planning board, and we probably think is a good idea as well. Like I said, does provide connectivity. It increases that intersection spacing. Some C2 zoning up there might permit like live work opportunities, provide some commercial amenities for residents in Creekside or Burnt Fork Estates to limit vehicle trips to town. So I think there are benefits to the commercial zone in that area. That last slide, the last slide in the summary, this is kind of the double edge here that shows that one that you have in your current packet, and the one that was considered through the planning board with the approach to Burnt Fork, and then the intersection of Logan Lane and Burnt Fork. What was being considered, what the planning board asked for, is to see a connection from the commercial zone to the residential. And this connection in this vicinity seems to make the most sense. If that were to happen, of course, this would get straightened through. And we actually have a different lot configuration slide that gets rotated to address if this road were to go away. And actually there is drops to lots. So the commercial intensity would go from 16 to 14 if that were to connection were to happen. I think it's a summary. Oops. So I think in summary, the property is already annexed, it's zoned. Yeah, the property's had a previous entitlement that is very similar in many ways to what's being proposed today. There's existing infrastructure in place, which anticipated the lands to be developed. The project complies with the growth policy. The project complies with town development code, subdivision regulations, no variances are proposed. The project is in alignment with existing zoning or approved zoning if it were to be rezoned C2 or approvable. Traffic impact studies have been conducted showing minimal impacts to the adjacent road network. Water and sewer is anticipated to be provided by the town. Of course, this will need to have capacity review by other professionals and the DEQ. Stormwater runoff will be treated and released at pre-development rates. High groundwater concerns are mitigated through construction methods and limitations on the plat. No basements, no crawl spaces, slab on grade, entrance plugs for utility work. And the developer in summary is in concurrence and agreement with the staff report and conditions of recommendation of approval with conditions as suggested by the planning board, and would like to move forward in 2021. So that was a lot. I skipped over some things, but if you guys have a packet, and it sounds like that's ready to be posted on the website so others can look at it. So with that, I think I should conclude.
With that, why don't we take a quick 7-minute break? That was a lot to digest. We'll take a 7-minute break, reconvene on the same matter. It's down to 6 minutes long. Sorry, I'm trying to round the nearest half hour. So 6-minute break, we'll reconvene.
Somebody's trying to get me.
All right, we're going to reconvene Stevensville's Town Council meeting, March 11th, 2021. Council left off on discussion, decision, approval with conditions or denial of preliminary plat for the major subdivision known as Burnt Fork Estates. Developers representative, Andy Meckford, presented the council with a presentation, a wealth of information. That information or that presentation in its entirety is already posted on the town's website. It is on the Burnt Fork Estates webpage as well as the meeting page for tonight's meeting. So it's in two different places. You can find it there in PDF format. So with that, I'll give the council an opportunity to continue their conversation regarding the subdivision.
First, I do want to say I appreciate you taking the time to give that presentation, and I'm not anti-growth at all. The only thing that I stand for is what my citizens have been asking and whatnot. But how long, Mayor, would it take for Public Works Director to prepare a staff?
We plan to expedite that. I've already had a conversation with the Public Works Director, Mr. Cruz, in doing a staff report. If we'd expedite it, I think we could turn it around in 10 days, plus or minus 2.
Go ahead, Dan.
We have lofty goals. But
I'm just gonna say a couple things here. I do appreciate you taking the time as well to give that presentation. There were a couple moments where the back of my neck got pretty hot with some of the things that you were saying. And I guess when I get to the heart of this, the people that you're speaking of are my neighbors, my neighborhood, the people that I visit their businesses, I work alongside them. And so when you make a remark that it's a moot point, I don't think any of this is a moot point, and I think that's a very poor choice of words to use. Yes, Creekside was, it was approved for 5 phases. We understand that. We also understand that that has expired and we've had to go about it a different way. What I don't think that is understood is that was accepted in the form that it was. And now we have a new developer coming in that isn't following the same pattern that Creekside was, and you admitted that. Why wouldn't you just continue that and mirror it? Why wouldn't you want to just mirror what has already been accepted? Rather than coming in and saying, yeah, but it's a moot point, we can kind of do whatever we want. I do appreciate how, you discussed the multifamily, but what you're proposing is almost double what was proposed before in Creekside, if I'm understanding your numbers correctly. So I guess that's my biggest takeaway, and I'm not really looking for an answer on that. I think that it is just a point that I'm trying to make is that when we are speaking about this community that obviously cherishes and loves this community, that they're so passionate that they're wanting to fight for this, we have to be really mindful of how they are perceiving things. And yes, I myself have been on the other end where I have helped develop 2 subdivisions. I understand that frustration, but we also have to be mindful of the other side. And when you have people that have put their roots in here, that were told when they purchased their homes that the rest of the development is going to mirror Creekside, and then we're in a position where it's not. And while some would argue that that's not really your area where you have to defend that, right? It's new developers, it's new. I would argue that it kind of is your responsibility. because people were told that they purchased their homes based on that. And I don't think that we have the right to now go back and say, oh, yep, sorry, it didn't happen. Here's what we're gonna do anyway. Sorry about your luck. It's a really sensitive area. And yes, you are entitled to an answer, but everybody is entitled to answers as well, right? You need a decision, but we need answers. So at some point, I think we have to come to maybe an agreement to disagree that now is not the time to make that decision. But let's, like I stated before, let's give our community members the opportunity to ask those questions. There's some hard ones, they're full of emotion. A lot of the questions are full of emotion. But I think they're deserving of that.
Next.
Go ahead, Patrick.
Is this an opportunity for remarks or questions as well for the developers?
This is, it's open in terms of what the council wants to do. This can be a dialogue between yourselves and the developers. It could be a dialogue just amongst yourselves. That's kind of the stage we're at right now is you guys are more or less driving the bus as to how long this goes and what we do next. So.
I just have a couple clarifying questions for the developers I would like to ask.
Sure.
My question is about the flow chart that was put on the website the other day and the process of approval.
Sure.
Can somebody walk me through how, I think the understanding is we approve the neighborhood and all of a sudden everything's approved and the whole neighborhood goes up. So I need to have a clear understanding of what needs to be done in those phases. And I know you touched on it earlier, but.
Hey, why don't I pull up the chart that we
You need this
published?
down here?
And yes, Janelle's gonna have to navigate to it on our website because that's what. And I'll pull it up. I'll focus on online as well. Just give me a quick moment because I think it's probably more appropriate that I review that from the town's perspective versus. Boy, from the town's perspective versus the developer explaining subdivision process. I think they're capable of doing so, but I don't want to put them in a strange spot. Hang on, let's get to it here.
Where do you have it located?
I just have it saved on my computer, so I just get to it. I don't ever use the website to access it. Gino, if you just search on the website, subdivision,
It's right there.
well, she needs to
Oh.
get to it. Yes, thank you.
Do you know what it looks like?
I know, yes, thank you, Jamie, I see it.
Here it is.
Okay. You see,
Which one are you on?
you're gonna do, you just type in subdivision.
How about just under departments?
There you go, you spelled subdivision.
No, I did.
Whoops. Okay, we'll set the mood for you. Let me share my screen for the folks online. So this chart was developed based on the administration's practice or past practice of subdivision review in our community, and where we basically formalized the processes that past subdivisions have gone through in this community. Montana code does allow for some options, which I can touch on when we get into the chart, but this is at least our rendition or our understanding of how this process should work for the community based on how precedent has been set previously. So starting right at the top, we have the developer submitting the preliminary plat for review. Okay, that was accomplished based on Mr. Mefford's timeline, April of 2020. Montana code tells the town of Stevensville that tells all municipalities that there are certain benchmarks you have to hit in review. I don't remember exactly what the review timeline, I think it's close to 45 or 60 days between the submittal and the substantial review. But then once we determine the application is sufficient for review and that it has all the information in it that it needs and checks the boxes, then the clock starts to tick on about 80 days. And that's the time frame that Mr. refers to. That was relaxed or kind of set back with Governor Bullock's directives in terms of how coronavirus affected public process. So that's part of the reason why we've gotten away with dragging this out close to a year. So that plat's been submitted for review. The town staff has had a chance to review it, and that's the work that resulted in the staff report that HDR helped us compile. So we hear oftentimes it's called the HDR report. It is not HDR's report on the subdivision. It is the staff's feedback and staff's review of the subdivision, to which we hired HDR and paid them handsomely to compile all of those pieces and check for compliance with the growth policy and a number of other subdivision standards that the town has. From there, we know then we have to go into a public notification and planning board recommendation process. So there were a number of notifications sent out in a letter regarding planning board meetings and council meetings. And so we've worked through that process. The town councils held their public hearings. They still have the ability to call more hearings if they desire, but you've done the number of hearings required to consider the proposal. So now you're at this crossroads of approval of the preliminary plat or denial. If council decides to deny the preliminary plat, then the applicant has the option to revise and resubmit that as many times as they want, provided they pay a fee. Or they could just say, well, we're not going to do anything. However that works, but they basically start square one for the denial. If you go down the road of approval, then that's where things get a little bit more exciting in terms of process and how quickly this moves. Because we get to throw the ball back into their court and they have to pull together the construction plans for the phase that they want to work on. So from the pre-construction phase forward, that happens with each of the, in the case of Burnforth Estates, that would happen for each of the 7 phases. Okay, so we'd complete the loop and go back again. Complete the loop and go back again for each phase of the subdivision. So when they approve the pre-construction, or when the council gets a chance to review and approve the construction plans and the plan for conditions from the council, skipping ahead to the next green box, when you get a chance to do that and you say, okay, we have enough water and sewer capacity, you can proceed with phase 1, great. That does not mean they get to proceed through phase 7, right? We may not have capacity, and capacity may change between phase 1 and phase 5 and phase whatever. So, that's why today we don't have a rigid capacity analysis for the subdivision, is because at the time, by the time the subdivision is ready to turn the water main on, capacity for our community could look very different, because it's fluid. It changes, right? Based on Burnforth Place, based on another proposal that comes in, the build out of other lots, Twin Creeks, all of those pieces factor into where our capacity sits. So it changes on a routine basis. So there's that review process between pre-phase construction and then your chance to review and address concerns. And it's not that all of these things happen between these next three bubbles here, that they all happen before you get a chance to review. The developers may come to the staff or may come to the council multiple times and say, we're trying to address this piece of the water main. And is it a 4-inch main or a 6-inch main, whatever the case is, right? They may come to council for some guidance before getting the final approval, right? I can remember just in the timeframe that I've worked for the town, and even prior to that, that we've been very familiar with Mr. Mefford coming to the podium discussing where we are in certain phases of a project before the final stamp finally came in. So, and Twin Creeks comes to mind here as well. So once you've approved the pre-construction stuff, mind you, shovel hasn't turned yet still. It's nothing else is happening there. We're still working on paperwork. Then when you bless that, the construction phase begins. And here's where there's a little bit of flexibility. The town's practice has been, you will not approve final plat until everything's in the ground and certified and you like the way it looks. An example is when Twin Creeks was built, there were issues with the asphalt. When they did some drilling and found core samples, they found the asphalt was deficient in some areas. We also found that the sewer line, I believe, had a quirk to it in terms of jetting. Those issues had to be resolved before they could build anything on that subdivision. And the reason for that was so the town got assurance that the infrastructure was solid before we started letting people live there. Where I talk about the flexibility, Montana code does allow that the town could approve final plat prior to them building the infrastructure. And then there are some things you can do to ensure that the infrastructure is still there. So there's some things there, but this is based on past practice, okay? So pre-construction begins, the construction is completed by the developer, the infrastructure is inspected and certified by the city staff, by engineers, all those things. We're all happy hunky-dory. We love the way the subdivision looks. The final plat is reviewed and approved by the town council, and then it's recorded with the clerk and recorder. Those parcels then become legal lots that can then be built on. So another thing here is that the town council, or excuse me, the town of Stevensville won't issue a building permit for a lot that is not a legal lot. So that's another piece is even if they were in the construction phase and they were building out streets and someone came in and said, well, they've got my section of sidewalk and street down, I'm on a build, and they come in for a building permit until it's a legal lot, we won't let it give them a permit. So there are some stop gaps in there as well.
Thank you. My only other question regarding the build out of phase, from my understanding in the planning and zoning means phase 1 and 2 run together. Is that correct?
I don't remember.
Not necessarily.
That's the way the calendar looks.
Okay, the timing could be,
Yeah.
but we could do phase 1 separate from phase 2.
In regards to phase 1 and 2, the booster station has to be upgraded. Who covers the cost of the booster station upgrade?
The developer would. But I think that this booster station is good for the first 2 phases. It's following that. The booster station has a capacity limit and they exceed that with, I think, the 3rd or 4th phase of the development. And so they would be responsible for that, above that, right?
Okay, thank you.
And that's a good example of where it's fair that it's because of their development that the capacity is exceeded, right? And so that part makes sense. But when it's, because that's not a global issue. Right now, there's enough capacity for so much. So they are responsible to mitigate those impacts. If they refuse to do so, they don't get approval.
And subsequent to that, I'm looking at the planning and zoning's recommendations for approval. And one of the things that is included in this, that's not included in the flow chart that Mayor put up, is that planning and zoning is recommending that a public hearing is required prior to the approval of the final plat of each phase. So when we get to that point where the town staff thinks that they're ready for that the developer has done what's necessary or final plat approval, we need to have a public hearing so that the public can see what's been done and what, if anything, is not sufficient for that to happen. One of the other things that's in the approval is in the conditions is the existing water booster station located on lot C12 shall be upgraded before the issuance of final plat for phase 4, which of course the developer is required to do. And then as one of the things that I've been doing some research on in the last few days is stormwater, and in comparison to what it was, I actually was able to find a report that the town was able to obtain when we did Creekside Meadows in 2002 versus what's required now. And it's, 5 pages versus 45 pages. So there's a lot of requirements to make sure that we don't push surface water downstream, which is where Creekside is. They're downstream from Bird Fork Estates. So that plan that has to be submitted and approved by the Department of Environmental Quality has to prove, not just plan, prove that you're not going to get more water, surface water in a subdivision that's adjacent to this. So that's not going to, in my opinion, that's not an easy road to hoe. It's really not, which is why they're not just planning on putting in a bunch of dry wells, which is what they did in Creekside Meadows. They just put in a bunch of dry wells and that's going to handle the runoff. Well, you can't do that anymore. It's a substantial permit to get that. And that's one of the things that's also in the conditions of approval, that they have that. And phase 1 has got a big detention pond in it, that big area. So they'll have to have that plan in place and that permit in hand before they can turn a shovel. So they have to be able to show that that will work. And if it doesn't work, they'll have to say, hey, wait a minute, it's not working. People are, and I've seen this happen before, and it happened with Mount Cook, and we had to do some substantial changes. It took a while, but we were able to satisfy what was necessary. And that's what we'll do again. I think that town administration is much more robust now than it was 20 years ago. I hope that we were able to respond to that more quickly than we did before. So I think that there are a lot of questions, and as I said before, and as the flow chart shows, this is not a house by the end of this year. This is a house by maybe the end of next year, maybe, if they can get the permits that are required. Maybe. Is the town's water problem going to go away? No. No, we're always going to have that. So one of the things that's going to happen is that, and one of the things that's encouraged in growth policy is that you don't try to divide the pie up smaller, you make the pie bigger, which is what we're doing with Bird Fork Estates. We're making the pie bigger so that we have more people using our facility and using our resources or using our utilities, which, by the way, is not taxed. It's paid for through water rights, strictly water rights, which is why we can't say that the taxpayers, you have to have the water users that are doing it, because believe it or not, there's water users that aren't in the town. So those water rates that you pay, that O&M that you pay, that operation and maintenance, that bond that you pay, it's never going to go away. It never goes away in most municipalities. It's always going to be there. What is done at the sewer plant right now compared to what was done 20 years ago is like night and day. Because we're on the Bitterroot River. I remember when I was on council and they were talking about ultraviolet treatment of wastewater and how ridiculous we thought that was. Well, guess what? They're doing it now. There's virtually no effluent that runs out of this town into the river. Ever. Which is practically unheard of in recent history. So we are on the cutting edge of doing what is necessary to make sure that the town has what it needs to exist. And one of the things that we need to do is make that pie bigger. And this is one of the ways that we do it. That was the plan back in 2000 when we annexed this property. We need more people in this town in order to be able to do what we need to make sure that we can provide quality water and wastewater treatment for this town. We can't stay static. We just can't. It will just cost us too much. So we have to be able to move forward. And I know this is an issue. I would like all those things answered too. I really would. And with the help of somebody who is developing additional property within this town, we will get that. But we have to have help doing it. We have to have somebody to push us to do that. And I hope that, to be perfectly honest, the houses, those residential houses in the R1 area of Burnt Fork Estates are going to be more expensive than the houses that were in Creekside Meadows. I guarantee you, they'll be $400,000 houses. They will. Slab on grade, raised above the elevation that there is now. Your site preparation, those lots are going to sell for $40,000 or $45,000. Unimproved. So lots in Burnt Fork or lots in Creekside Meadows barely reach 35. So those houses are going to be expensive. They're not going to be cheap houses. So they're going to be a lot of the same type of people that live in Creekside Meadows, which is what we would like to see. Retired people who want to live in a quiet area. So you can not believe me, Mr. Gibson, if you want, but that's the fact. It's a fact.
I didn't say anything.
I know, but you were shaking your head. So those houses will be more expensive than you paid for in your house. I guarantee you.
I'll talk about that.
Okay. So that's where I am with this. I think that we need to try to continue to move forward. I know there's a lot of unanswered questions and a lot of angst by people that live there. But understand, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, this is the only opportunity we have as a public to be able to tell someone else what they can do with their property. I can't tell you what to do with your property. This is when we had an opportunity to say, here's what I would like you to do with your property. Once that final plat is approved, then that ability goes away. So now is the time when we say, okay, the town has issues. Those issues aren't going to go away, but we will continue to work on them with the help of these people that are developing another area within the town. But we can tell them, this is what we want for a size of lot. This is how much your house can be on this lot. This is what the street looks like. This is what the sidewalk looks like. This is how much land has to be donated to parks. This is what you do with the stormwater. This is how big these water and sewer mains have to be and where they have to run. This is how many plugs you have to put in there to make sure that the surface water isn't running down the trench. This is the opportunity we have to do that. All these subdivisions that you see out in the county, all they have to get is a septic permit. That's it. That's all they have to do. They can build whatever they want. And believe me, some of the stuff that's built out there right now is junk. It's horrible. There's people all the time looking at moving into a brand new house and it's cold, ceiling leaks, the roof's coming off. So this is our opportunity to say, this is what you're going to build. This is what it's going to look like. This is how many you can put on an acre. This is how big your lot is. This is how much sidewalk you have. This is what the streets are going to look like. This is the only opportunity we have to do that. Thank you.
Any more discussion from council? Or any more questions or dialogue? Does the council want to continue this conversation to their next regular council meeting? Do you want special meetings called? How, I guess, what next steps are envisioned by you as a collective body?
I'm open to discussing again at the next meeting, but I would also like at our next meeting for us to be able to use that public hearing section for this as well, so that we don't have to book anything special. I think we should give the public one more opportunity to speak, especially given the new information we were given tonight.
Okay. Any other remarks from council or guidance?
I guess-
Summarize.
I would have a question. Are you open to entertaining the idea of hosting that meeting for our community? And I mean, I don't mean to like really put you on the spot, but I really mean to really put you on the spot.
I'm fine to be on the spot. And I want to take this opportunity. When you step up to this mic and you can't read your notes, I had no intention of offending you or anyone in this room. I'm here to try to present facts and the details and clear up some misconceptions. So
Sure.
I would be really interested to look at the dialogue, because it seems like something I said was a moot point. And I don't know if that was the lightning rod. I'd like to see the context, and I very well could have picked a bad word. So I just want to set that record
Sure.
straight that, I'm here to try to backfill information. We've heard a lot of public comments. I tried my best. I honestly did a valiant attempt to present what we've seen and heard. And it's not always nice. I mean, that's the reality of it. Which, I mean, we obviously extended an olive branch to members of that association, knowing they are going to be the most impacted. And we don't get a lot of positive feedback. I mean, that's the reality. And it's a tough world, and so you got to have some chops to deal with it, and that's fine.
We're on the council, so
So-
I totally understand what you're saying.
Anyway, I just wanted to clear that. So back to the question of, would we host a meeting? Obviously, there's probably no decision made here tonight. There's some information, I gave a lot of information. You need to digest it. I think there's this anticipation of seeing some input from Public Works, hopefully in the next 10 days, plus or minus 2. Obviously that's going to show up, and that's going to be yet more new information though. And this is our concern. We've been in this a long, long time, and there's a lot of cost, and that doesn't help the affordability. And affordability in this valley is a huge problem. I have seen it get it has gone ridiculously off the radar. It's always been a mecca. People come here, and they're going to continue. And this COVID and other things has indicated that we don't see that trend slowing. I mean, the growth policy, as I pointed out, said Missoula's growing. That was 5 years ago. If that trend, that trend has been proven time and time again, it's only getting much more prevalent. So, that concept if growth is coming, is there. I'm concerned about this question of new information and this report and what this might look like by us hosting. I guess I need to understand what that looks like. Are we anticipating to have another public hearing? Do I think that the public ought to get another chance at the mic to speak? I mean, outside a few minutes ago, I was told, well, you haven't had any meetings. You haven't had any public hearings. If we get into this definition of a meeting and a hearing, there's a slight nuance, and it's how it's noticed.
Sure.
But the people that are concerned about this know about this project. So this concept of there's not been enough information and stuff, that's a little hard to understand. It's here. You know what it looks like, and you've had plenty of opportunity to do that. To have another public hearing, I welcome them all to come to the mic again in a meeting format, and that's fine. It's untypical of process to get into a dialogue and a mic battle, if you will.
Mhm.
That's always a dangerous place to go in my mind. But having another public hearing is fine. We do that. That's when. I don't know what it means by us hosting.
So when I say that, my envisionment of that is exactly what you're stating that you don't want to do. So it would be, you facilitate a meeting where maybe you're sitting here and the community is out there, wherever that is, right? And they have the opportunity to come up to the podium and say, I have this question, I have this question, I have this question. You answer them, and they have the opportunity to say, okay, but what about this? I mean, we're talking, it's not going to be an hour or two long.
I'll do it.
But I think
Yeah,
it's
I'll do it.
necessary.
I don't know if that's a public meeting.
Well, we wouldn't have anything to do
I
with
can host it. I
That
mean,
would
we've
be you.
hosted 2 meetings with Creekside already.
Sure.
If-
I'm
if-
not
if-
talking just Creekside. I'm talking about the whole
Yeah,
community.
it could be a notice meeting, and I will sit at that chair and I will take comments. There needs to be some ground rules in place.
Sure.
And, because I don't need to repeat the same thing over and over. And there may be answers they don't like necessarily, but I'm happy to sit there and have that dialogue if that's what is necessary. And I would welcome council members to attend that
Sure.
meeting and hear that dialogue, because I think that would be important.
Yeah, I think if you're willing to do that, the townspeople have the opportunity to have their answers received and answered, I guess, directly, rather than going through. I mean, yes, I understand you've extended an olive branch, but let's maybe do it one more time.
I'll do it again. I have
And
no problem
then-
to do that.
We have the opportunity to then have a public hearing to hear any other concerns that there may be once
Sure.
that's done. This is just such a big project that I don't want to make a decision and then we're going to have people that say, well, I wasn't heard, right? But I think we need to go the extra mile to be sure that people are heard and the majority are felt heard.
I can understand and respect that, and I could find a venue and put a notice and say, hey, we're gonna have an informal, it's sort of informal, it's not a public hearing, it's not a
Sure.
public meeting, but
Exactly.
I'll have an open mic and try to answer as much as I can. And there's some things they may not get an answer to. I mean,
Right.
the answer may be, I don't know,
Yep.
or pending, that's a possibility. Or it may be an answer that isn't what they want to hear necessarily, but I'm open to do that.
I really appreciate that.
Okay.
I think it's extremely important.
Yeah, it's definitely very untraditional, but I like untraditional
And
as well,
that's
so.
great. Let's do
All
that.
right, that's
Let's
fine.
make untraditional normal. How
Okay.
about that?
I'm good with it.
you.
I guess we'll figure out a time, I'll discuss with the developers, and
Okay.
I think it would be important that they're maybe there as well.
Yeah, I agree.
One of them is here tonight, so I've told them these other meetings, they're kind of procedural and that sort of thing, but I said, I think it's important you show up at some of these. When we get down to the decision time, I think it's important you come to this meeting, and be present. And one of them's here tonight, another one's not, but I think it's important that they're there at that meeting. Again, I may be their spokesman, but I think they could at least be there, and there may be things I would need to confer with them to say,
Sure.
this is something they want, are you willing to do that? And maybe they don't get that answer tonight, but it could maybe be forthcoming. And like I say, that answer might not be satisfactory, but we'll at least have that dialogue.
I appreciate that.
Okay. So to summarize, unless council has any further requests or comments regarding the next steps, it's been requested that the developers host their own forum to give the public an opportunity to ask questions. Following that forum, the town council would hold a public hearing and go from there. Is that a fair assessment of how you want to proceed? More or less looking for unanimity.
And I guess the best way to really kind of make it official and all that is, I'll make a motion to table this agenda item until after we have a Q&A session and public hearing.
Is there a second?
A second.
It's been moved by Mr. Beck, seconded by Ms. Devlin to table this item until a public forum and public hearing are held. Council discussion.
So are we gonna schedule the public hearing today and then?
I had suggested our next council meeting where we have that public
Sorry.
hearing section, or we have the public hearing section on our agendas. We can do it then. So
I think it is dependent upon when you can have your meeting. I mean, I don't want to schedule our public hearing and have you still be looking for a time to meet with everyone.
I envision this meeting happening very quick, no more than a week. I mean,
Perfect.
I'm thinking next week. I want to get this done or moved on, we've been here a long time. And I want the vetting process to be comfortable for you guys, but I'm certainly not looking to extend this, to indefinite times, because we've already been through that through the COVID. We tried to get that after that meeting got canceled at the high school. We were floating in this just unknown. So I definitely need definition, and understand if it's up to me to schedule, I'll have to coordinate with the venue. I don't know if it's the church, the school, the library, this room, I'll have to figure that out, but I don't see any reason that that can't be done. And I think we have the information. So, I don't think I need to go gather. The only thing I could see, and if there's value or concern about this, is do I need to do that after this public works summary is done? I would kind of think, I'm thinking not. I'm thinking I'm not gonna wait to see that to then schedule it. I think I'm gonna schedule a meeting and I can get the notice to you. I mean, we can send a notice to the Creekside Homeowners Association, maybe we could put something in the paper to say, hey, we're gonna have this informal public forum. I think maybe publish it in the paper, get some notice out there, but I see that happening and certainly in the next 7 to 10 days.
Great, then I think, Dempsey, I would agree with what you're saying. At our next meeting, we can use the public hearing time.
And just to speak to the Public Works staff report, I don't see it coming down as a bombshell around the project. I think that Mr. Thomas, the former Public Works Director, captured a lot of the Public Works relative information in the staff report. And so I don't see that rocking the boat in a big way. I do appreciate if we could confirm the date in terms of public hearing wise. Just because when we put public hearings on our agenda, and public hearings aren't always required in terms of notice requirements, but just out of an abundance of caution to save ourselves from any potential litigation, if you will commit to the March 25th council meeting as a public hearing, then that gives Janelle and I enough time to tell the paper by Monday at noon that we need 2 public notices on the 17th and the 24th. Because that's how quick the turnaround is when we get to public hearings. So that was kind of my hope that you would go that route, because if we have that public hearing on the 25th, and that kind of commits the developers to a time frame to say, okay, we got to have this forum done before the 25th. Not thinking, I know for a fact they're not going to drag this out. He's already expressed that intent, and then that keeps us to a committed timeline as well.
Since we already have a special council meeting set up for the 1st, and it's a short agenda, why don't we go ahead and do the public hearing then? And we can do put this item on that agenda, and that would give them a chance, just in case they can't get a venue next week, give them an extra week to be able to do that.
The item on the agenda or the public hearing? So you want to have a public hearing and a decision after that?
Correct.
I don't know as though they're going to have any challenge getting a venue put together. I think that in 2 weeks' time, they should be able to, we have some resources we can share with them in terms of venues, because we've gotten very familiar with venues other than town hall. So I think that they'll be able to pull that, but and the reason I say that, Mr. Vick, is I think if you hold your public hearing on the 25th and you commit to that, that still leaves the 1st as an option if you need to further discuss.
Okay, and I was just thinking the same thing. We'll do the public hearing on the 25th and potentially come up with a decision on April 1st.
Because part of the challenge with having multiple meetings on the same subject is we have to spend a little bit of time getting back up to speed of where we left off. And that's why it was so advantageous, although it was grueling, it was advantageous to have those 2 planning and zoning meetings. They lasted a very long time, into the wee hours of the morning. And in fact, we discovered things about our office building that we didn't know happened in the middle of the night with our computers, but they do. But doing that just twice instead of over 3 or 4 meetings was super helpful. So in I guess summarizing the intent of your motion, which is to ask the developer to hold a forum and then hold a public hearing. The forum would be held within the next 2 weeks, and your public hearing would be held on the 25th of March.
That satisfies my request.
Okay.
Have we discussed when we'll have a presentation from the Public Works Director?
Well,
Will that be a special meeting? Will that come on the 25th?
we will have it ready for you by the 25th. Absolutely. And like I said, I think that the developers are okay in proceeding without that information. Because I honestly don't see, like I said, it's not going to be a super elaborate report because it's supplemental to what's already there. But I do want to give Mr. Cruz an opportunity to weigh in on the impacts and what the subdivision looks like from his experiences that he brings to the community. That maybe we didn't glean some insight from the previous public works director. So I just want him to have that opportunity since he's got to live with it a bit longer than some others. So any further council comment?
Yeah, the only thing I'll say is that, and this is kind of what has happened before, is that we can only kick this can down the road so far. I'm hoping that a lot of questions get answered sufficiently, but I am not convinced that anybody's mind will be changed. I'm willing to give it a shot.
All right, any last council comments on the motion at hand before we call for public comment? Okay.
Yeah,
Oh.
I was waiting for you to get done with your sentence. This is why I'm saying that April 1st will be the day that I anticipate it to be the day. I feel like I should have all the information that I need to make a fully informed decision on that day. I know that we've had this information for a while, and I've had it, and I've listened to public comment, listened to the developers, listened to us. I believe that by that day, I myself should be able to have everything put together to come up with a decision for this large project.
Do you realize how cool it is to schedule a decision on April Fool's Day?
I was not going to touch on that.
Okay. All right, any last council comments? Okay, we will open the floor for public comment. Public comment on we're being very specific about public comment here, folks. It is whether or not the council will proceed with holding a forum that the developers will hold a forum and that a public hearing will be held on March 25th. That is the limit of public comment to what we're going to keep, because we do want to not be here all night. So knowing that we have this ahead of us. State your name and address for the record, please.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Steve Gibson, 1517 Creekside. I just want to thank Councilperson Vic, Short, and Devlin for what they've done tonight. Listening to the people, wanting to listen more to the people. I think that was very, very, I commend you for that. I commend you for that. Because there's been a lot of things about public hearings. I guess I can't say that some weren't published. In regards to the community meeting, I do believe that needs to be published. So I don't know if you could get it to the paper by Friday. If you had it next week, you'd have to have it later. Because at the last meeting, over half the people that were opposed to this subdivision did not live in Creekside Meadows. So it's going to have to be published somehow for the community to know. And I think the paper has a guideline of tomorrow for next week's paper.
Monday at noon, I think.
Monday at noon.
I think we could-
If we prepare the advertisement, is that right?
Yeah, and even if you don't.
I think we can have a venue locked down by Monday and then we're gonna publish.
Thanks for addressing that. Further comment?
It'll be at Steve's house.
Go right back by the retention pond. And just in all due respect, Councilman Ludington, you said that these houses were going to cost more than Creekside. You said something like 400,000.
Mr. Gibson, I'm sorry, but we're going to.
Well, they're selling for 500 now because
We're going to keep it on the.
and people wanted to leave. Okay. So I guess it was a public comment on the agenda item, but that's changed now. It's only about.
Correct. The comment is on holding a hearing and holding a forum with the.
All right. Well, I appreciate you doing that, council people. Let's see the public. Thank you.
Any further public comment? Okay. All right, with that motion on the floor again is to hold, to ask the developer to hold a forum and then to hold a public hearing on March 25th. With that, we'll go ahead and call for the vote. Ms. Bergheim?
Councilmember Devlin,
Aye.
Councilmember Ludington,
Aye.
Councilmember Sherb,
Aye.
and Councilmember Vic.
Aye.
Great, okay. We will move right along then. We're going to jump back up to new business item A, discussion decision, consent to the mayor's appointment of Elizabeth Hyde as volunteer firefighter. Your packet contains the relevant information regarding the appointment. Chief Motley recommends the appointment to the mayor's office, and I concur. And so Libby has already initiated some of the training necessary and is excited to be on board with the rest of our volunteers that serve the community. So her appointment is before you this evening.
I'll make a motion to approve your appointment of Ms. Hyde as a volunteer firefighter.
For a second.
I'll second.
All right, it's been moved by Mr. Vick and seconded by Ms. Devlin to consent to the mayor's appointment of Libby Hyde as volunteer firefighter. Council discussion? Public comment? All right, we'll call for the vote. Ms. Berthoud?
Councilmember Devlin,
Aye.
Councilmember Ludington,
Aye.
Councilmember Sherb,
Aye.
Councilmember Vic.
Aye.
All right, next item is discussion decision on resolution 485, declaring certain property as surplus and authorizing its disposal. Somewhat of a routine process for the council. This comes up once in a while throughout the year where we find junk laying around we want to get rid of. In order to do so legally, we ask your permission to do so. The equipment we're disposing of in this round of surplus is our old phone system. It's an NEC SV8100 telephone system. It's obsolete in terms of our use. We cannot use it anymore given our upgrade. It may be useful to someone else. Then we also have some other miscellaneous electronics, including keyboards, small printers, routers, those types of things that end up in your junk drawer of your garage. We have plenty of those. So a lot of, primarily the phone system, but any other valuable items on the miscellaneous electronics will be surplus through a new auction system that we've signed up for. A lot of other municipalities and governments use it. It's called Public Surplus. It's an online system. They auction it for us, and then they basically charge a fee to the customer to run the auction. So there's no cost on our part, and we get rid of our crap. So with that, resolution 485 is before you.
I'll make a motion to approve resolution 485.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Sherb, seconded by Mr. Vick, to approve resolution 485. Council comments? Public comment? All right, hearing none, we'll call for the vote. Ms. Bertha?
Councilmember Devlin,
Aye.
Councilmember Ludington,
Aye.
Councilmember Sherb,
Aye.
and Councilmember Vic.
Aye.
Do you want me to slow down?
No.
We're just
No,
going right through
It
it.
is past my bedtime. Speed
I
up.
know, I told you we try to get out of here by 9, but I gave an hour of buffer, given good conversation. All right, we have the next item of business is discussion decision liquor license ownership transfer from Bradley Paulson to TKO Walker LLP of 209 Main Street. It looks like there is a representative of TKO Walker in the room this evening. Appreciate you hanging through that. The application information is in your packet. Standard procedures when a license is transferred for whatever reason, the codes that were written in 1973 require the council to bless that transfer. The staff recommends transfer and consent to that transfer with the condition that the business license fee for TKO Walker be paid when that license is transferred. They did the license transfer fee or the liquor license fee, but they omitted the $50 business license fee from the payment. So we've requested that fee be paid when the license be transferred.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved by Ms. Devlin, second by Mr. Sherb to approve liquor license transfer. Council discussion? Public comment? All right, with that, we'll call for the vote. Ms. Bertha?
Councilmember Devlin,
Aye.
Councilmember Ludington,
Aye.
Councilmember Sherb,
Aye.
and Councilmember Vic.
Aye.
Okay, last item of business is discussion decision on resolution 486, reinstating funding for the water and sewer bill assistance program. You're familiar with the program, obviously, and the process we've undertaken to get to this point today. This would reinstate a charge for funding of the program. That charge would be 40 cents per customer, and that charge, if approved this evening through this resolution, would take effect on your the bill you receive in April for water and sewer.
So moved.
For approval?
Yes.
Okay, and Mr. Vick is, and it's been moved by Mr. Vick, second by Ms. Devlin to approve resolution 486. Council discussion. Public comment. Okay, we'll call for the vote. Ms. Burnett.
Councilmember Devlin.
Aye.
Councilmember Ludington.
Aye.
Councilmember Sherrod.
Aye.
And Councilmember Vick.
Aye.
Okay, executive report. In the theme of water bills, we have some exciting changes to announce. After having your postcards for probably as long as I've been alive, we're changing it. I'm sorry. You will receive an 8.5 by 11 trifold bill in the mail from the town of Stevensville. Our billing system is being modified where we will outsource printing of the bills. I'll just give you some insight into the system. Our water bills are generated by our Black Mountain system. We buy paper that's perforated and stamped from a vendor, and then we run each of those over 900 bills, I think. We run those through our printer in the office, and it usually locks up our printer for an hour and a half while those print. Challenges with the post office have presented us to be more efficient in how we send bills, because they want us now to pay a handsome annual fee to mail water bills by postcard, and then they want us to pay essentially the same rate you would pay to put a 33-cent stamp on every postcard for a bulk, and we do a bulk mailing, sending out more than 900. So with that, we felt it was most cost effective and fair to our ratepayers to go with an alternate company to print our bills. So we there's a company that works with Black Mountain Software with a number of other customers. They will take our data from the system. They will print the bills, they fold, seal, all that stuff. They're a national billing company. They mail it. And then the positive thing that I think a lot of people are going to like is that it comes with a web service just for your account. No more pay-gov baloney on our website. So you go to our website, you want to pay your bill online, you go in, you type in your web ID, you get to set up recurring payments, you get to set up electronic payments, you get to set up e-statements. If you don't want us to mail you a bill at all, we will just not do that anymore. A lot of advantage to doing that. So we're really excited to roll it out. We got confirmation today, as a matter of fact, with some training, that is all coming to fruition. Your new bill, we will get a sample out very soon for folks before the bills get mailed out and people go, what the heck is this? You'll be able to see a sample of what a bill will look like. It will include information about your last 12 months of usage. So you'll have a graph on your bill that'll show what your usage has been for water. There's a nice hefty message section where we can share some information about upcoming meetings, maybe the monthly calendar of council meetings, or information about cleanup events. Rather than just the 2 lines at the bottom of the postcard, we can put a lot more information in there. One last thing that's really neat about doing it this way is that when we have things like mass mailings where we have to mail out to every customer, instead of sending our water bills out and then subsequently stamping a bunch of envelopes with now it's, I think, 51-cent stamps for 900 and some customers, we can do an insert for much lesser charge into the water bill. So sometimes you may occasionally see an extra page with your water bill with some information. Maybe it's about a public hearing or rate change or what have you, but a lot more efficient to that than double enveloping everything in that. So just know that those things are changing a little bit, a lot of it, but hopefully for better efficiency, both on the customer's part and for the town, which hopefully results in some cost savings for us. So Be patient, please be patient with our staff as we adjust to the new bills, because we are going to see them, for the most part, when we mail them, or when we tell BDS to print them and mail them, and you get them in the mail, that's really the first time we're seeing your bill at the same time. So we push a button one day, and then the next day they go out in the mail. So just be patient with us but we're getting ready for customer support in terms of helping folks navigate the online web portal and all of those things. It's a lot less archaic than some of the other systems that have been presented in the past. And it's a huge step in the right direction for our community in terms of how those things are handled. So I'm excited about that. The other thing we can be excited about, and many are aware of it, is that the American Rescue Plan passed Congress this week. And that will bring direct aid to local governments across the nation. With CARES, the money went to the state, and the state controlled how that was spent and who it went to. With this, it will still go through the state in terms of treasury, and the physical cash will pass through the state's bank account, but it will come to the town, and the state will not restrict exactly how that funding is utilized or anything like that. There will be general guidance from the U.S. Treasury on how that funding is spent and what it's used for. I can tell you we will get more information on this tomorrow through the League of Cities and Towns. We have a municipal town hall scheduled that all the cities will be on. So we'll have better guidance, but preliminarily what they're saying is it needs to be spent by the end of December of 2024. There will be 2 installments. One should be coming relatively soon, and then the next will be in another year, usually. Estimates based on the calculation that the bill shares how that funding is allocated shows that the town of Stevensville could receive up to $501,000 for coronavirus aid. So you can expect, as we approach our July budget sessions or our July budget adoption, as we get into budget sessions, as soon as we put BFE in the rearview mirror, that we'll have some conversations about how that funding is best utilized going forward, because it is no small chunk of change to Stevensville, certainly. In that vein, as most of you are aware, I attended the City Congressional Conference this week. It started on Sunday and ended yesterday. And there's still a couple of meetings that are out pending with our federal congressional representation. But that conference is hosted by the National League of Cities. And there was a wealth of information. It was a virtual conference, of course. I didn't travel to DC, but wealth of information shared about how the American Rescue Plan will help and aid cities and towns across the nation. But one of the things I took away that I thought was interesting, that I'll just put a quick plug in, was the initiative of priority-based budgeting. So you're familiar with my soapbox of performance-based budgeting, and this is really kind of a spin-off of that, in that there are special ways that we can better prioritize what the priorities are for our community and how those are funded. And in some ways, in the studies that they did when they adopted or followed a priority-based budgeting principle, they were able to realize a savings in their budget of about 10% overall, citywide. To the town of Stevensville, 10% is, a lot of money to save. So one of the exercises in that specific course was take 10% of your budget and then tell us what you would do with it. So what would we do with $400,000? Well, we have that question before us now. What would we do with $501,000? That's obviously related to coronavirus, but if you had $400,000 that you could free up in the budget, what would town do with that? There's a lot of possibilities. So you'll probably see more information about that as we glean more from the course that I attended there. So, but overall, very well worth the education that they offer, and I appreciated the opportunity to attend that conference. April 1st, you are well aware now that we will hold a special meeting. The primary purpose of that meeting was, which I didn't think anyone would care to even attend, but now we'll have a crowd, is we have to open bids for the Third and Fifth Street improvement projects that are coming our way. We've been talking about at least the Third Street project now for close to 4 years, far too long. We're excited now to finally be able to get that up off the ground, get construction underway. So in order to do so, we have some antiquated codes in our ordinances from 73 that say council shall be present in the presence of the town clerk at a meeting to open bids for certain construction projects, and this happens to fall in that parameter. So we have to have a special meeting to get that done. Fortunately, you'll also have the opportunity to consider before the states that day as well. So the bids are currently being, or request for bids is currently being advertised on the town's website, and it will also hit the newspapers starting next week. And so if you'd like to review the plans and the specs for those projects, those are on our website. If you hit, I think, the resources tab, and then hit bids, RFPs, the information is listed there. So those are underway. In addition, what you'll find on that page is an RFQ for our water rights hydrology work. So a lot of discussion around water rights as well. We're finally seeking a hydrology firm to come in, partner with our water rights attorney and our engineers with HDR to get the data needed to fulfill a permit application to the NRC. So that RFQ is underway. They have, I think, until mid-April to return proposals. Those will be evaluated and we'll bring a contract before the town council. We anticipate, and as you're aware through correspondence with our water rights attorney, that we hope to have this water rights challenge closed out by December of 2022. So long from gone, but just around the corner. In the vein of the street projects I spoke about, there are some grant opportunities on the horizon that the administration is aggressively pursuing. One is the Transportation Alternatives Grant. The application for that is due in June. One of the projects we're considering as a proposal is sidewalk improvements along 6th and 5th between Main and College. And that would, the goal there is to dramatically increase pedestrian safety in those heavily traveled. They're heavily traveled by vehicles and they're also heavily traveled by pedestrians. Those are both safe routes to school as they have been designated, and they are both without adequate sidewalks. So we held preliminary meetings with HDR today, both Mr. Cruz and I did, to get some further information. We are going to we don't want to do. So we're going to have some conversations with those folks and see how they feel about where sidewalks should be in their neighborhoods and make it fit and adaptable. So we're looking forward to that. Another grant opportunity will hopefully, there's a number of opportunities in terms of what the money could be used for, but one thing we're targeting, as we've seen past projects funded by this specific grant opportunity, is a potential for a dog park. We have some property over by Fall River Valley Park that's been identified as a possible site. So as soon as Mr. Sunstein gets back from his baby vacation, which we're excited to welcome him back week after next, then we'll get underway. That application has some lead time as well into May. So exciting things that we could maybe bring some improvements to Stevensville that don't really cost us anything. So that's all I have. I think that I really wanted to report on. We will make an adjustment to the flow chart. Mr. Ludington, for the subdivision review, Mr. Ludington brings up a good point. A recent change in law, I think, I can't remember exactly how long ago, but it's very recent, requires a public hearing when you do a phased subdivision before final plat. A public hearing is required. The documentation I referenced was dated. So we'll make that adjustment in the flow chart, get it republished. But Other than that, any questions from me? From this council? Oh my, is it a question? Are you ready for
Oh, no,
comments?
it's a question.
Okay.
Police chief.
What, please, chief?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm willing to tell you, we have extended an offer of employment, and the offer of employment has been accepted. It is conditional, and we're waiting for the results of a background investigation before we make an official announcement as to who that candidate is. So I would hope within the next week or 2 weeks that we have the ability to publicize who that individual is. The offer is conditional on those pieces. I hope we're working on timing a little bit. You probably won't see consent on the 25th agenda. I think that might be too ambitious. And the first might be pushing it, especially given the content of that agenda. But your first meeting in April could very well have a consent item for a chief of police appointment. It just depends on how quickly the background comes together and those other pieces. So, any other questions?
Yeah, I was just asked about, the other night I was asked about the sign on Peterson Place that we had approved a few months ago. Folks are wondering when that's going up.
The Public Works Department is currently, I'll just put a quick plug for Steve. What he hit the ground like running like that, like the treadmill was cranked max, and he just stepped onto it and didn't phase him. He's really put a focus on leakage, as he's reported in his report. They're also doing some reconciliation of some street signage because there's some other street signs that are going missing on a frequent basis. And so there's an order being placed for a bulk of street signage that we need, and that sign's on that list.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think it was, we approved it this summer, and I don't think it was prioritized by the Public Works Department in a timely way, but they're aware of the issue now. So.
Yeah, I just want to make sure there's no outlet.
The no outlet sign.
Yeah, that's the one.
That's the only one in Peterson.
I didn't know if
outstanding.
I didn't know if the STOP sign was needing to get replaced or not.
There's a number of signs that we found were old and needed to be replaced anyway, and that was part of the reconciliation we did. If anyone knows what keeps happening to the street the street signs on 9th and College, we sure appreciate a tip there because we've only replaced them 3 or 4 times, and we haven't had that much wind, and they're all but baby welding those things on there. So, whoever's on 9th that has 3 or 4 of our street signs, we'd sure appreciate those back. So, but yeah, the street signage is being addressed, and I can also preempt and let everyone know that spring cleanup information will be released very, very soon. Hopefully next week we get some public information out there in regards to the spring cleanup that we typically do and all of those pieces. So with that, I'm not taking any more questions. You can just make your comments.
You done?
You're done?
You
It's really way past our bedtime now.
Your time allotment of 5 minutes.
I don't have a time limit, you guys. There's a lot to update you on. We're a
Putting
very
you on a
busy
time
community.
limit. You just earned one.
Yeah, I think.
I do have one set of comments to make, and first off, I am going to quote somebody on this. It might sound like I might be trying to jab at this recent subdivision that's getting put in there, but it is not. My council comments tonight are purely on public participation, which was focused on by a hero of mine that she passed away at the age of 108 down in Florida. And I got to meet her when I was in elementary school, and Victoria's probably going to know the name when I say it, and that's Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, who is huge, who was a newspaper writer for the Miami Herald and championed to protect the Everglades and whatnot. And what she did was, for public participation, was she went out and stimulated the public, and she did this with this quote: "Be a nuisance where it counts. Do your part to inform and stimulate the public to join your action. Be depressed, discouraged, and disappointed at failure and the disheartening effects of ignorance, greed, corruption, and bad politics. but never give up. And I want to say, however you perceive an issue and whatnot, I am super glad to see how our community has gotten together to participate here lately in these large decisions that we're undertaking, especially since none of us here really know how to vote for the betterment of this community without having people, or the people that we represent, come up and say, hey, we have these questions. This is what we want to see happen with this town. And for that, I thank you. And that's all I have.
Any other comments from council? You have 5 minutes.
Well then.
Okay. Board reports?
We haven't met.
Park hasn't been.
We'll work on that.
Airport met, I wasn't able to make the meeting.
All right, with that, I think it's time to adjourn. Thanks for your time, everyone. We'll see you at the next one.